The year was 2187, and Dr. Helen Martinez sat in front of her computer screen at the Deep Space Communications Array on Luna. She had been listening to signals from space for 7 years now, and most of them were just noise from stars and planets. But tonight was different. The pattern coming from Epsilon Eridani was too perfect and too organized to be natural. She played it again and felt her heart race. This was it. This was what humanity had been waiting for. Captain Richard Hayes received the message while he was sleeping on the UNS Horizon. His ship was the best that Earth had ever built, and he was proud to command it. When the United Nations Space Council called him about the signal, he knew what they would ask. Someone had to go and meet whoever sent that message. He accepted the mission without hesitation. The crew of 300 people prepared for the 6-month journey. Commander Lisa Park checked every weapon system twice, even though Richard told her they probably would not need them. She was his tactical officer, and it was her job to worry. Dr. Vincent Cole spent his time reading everything about alien biology that existed. He had waited his whole life for this moment. Helen joined them 3 days before launch. She brought her team of linguists and enough computer equipment to fill 2 cargo holds. The signal repeated every 12 hours, and she was determined to understand what it meant. During the long journey through space, she worked 20 hours a day. The pattern seemed to say welcome. The aliens wanted to meet them. When the horizon finally reached Epsilon Eridani, the crew gathered at the windows to see. The 4th planet was beautiful, with purple forests and cities made of crystal that sparkled in the sunlight. The aliens sent a shuttle to meet them, and it looked alive. The hull moved like skin, and lights pulsed under the surface. Richard stood on the bridge with Lisa beside him. She wanted to keep the aliens at a distance until they knew more, but he could see the excitement in her eyes too. This was bigger than both of them. This was bigger than Earth. When the alien shuttle docked with the horizon, everyone held their breath. The aliens were tall and graceful, with skin you could almost see through. Colors rippled across their bodies like emotions painted in light. Helen stepped forward with her translation device, and the aliens responded with sounds and flashing patterns. It took an hour, but she managed to establish basic communication. The aliens called themselves the Kavan. Vincent could barely contain himself when the Kavan offered to show them their world. Richard agreed immediately, and Lisa frowned but said nothing. 50 crew members, including Helen and Vincent, prepared to go down to the surface. Greg Foster was one of the security officers chosen for the mission, and he checked his weapon 3 times before boarding the shuttle. The planet was even more amazing up close. The capital city was called Lumina, and every building seemed to be grown rather than built. Streets adjusted under their feet, and the air smelled like flowers none of them could name. The Kavan had no weapons and no armies. They claimed they had lived in peace for 10,000 years. The aliens showed them everything. Vincent saw laboratories full of creatures that had been enhanced through genetic engineering. The Kavan had cured every disease and extended their lives to 500 years. They offered to share this knowledge with humanity. Helen learned their language better each day, and the Kavan seemed genuinely happy to meet them. But Greg noticed something during a tour of their food facilities. There were massive underground chambers that the Kavan quickly redirected them away from. When he mentioned it to Lisa later, she made a note but did not want to seem suspicious. The relationship with the Kavan was too important to risk over a closed door. 2 weeks passed, and the crew lived like honored guests. The Kavan gave them gifts of technology and biological samples. They asked if they could send ambassadors to Earth to learn about human culture. Richard thought it was a wonderful idea. This was the beginning of something incredible. On the last night before returning to the ship, the Kavan held a celebration. The aliens created beautiful art with their glowing bodies and shared food that tasted like nothing humans had ever experienced. Dr. Karen White received medical equipment that was centuries ahead of Earth technology. Commander Jake Murphy got plans for a power system that could change everything. Then the Kavan made their request. They wanted to send 50 of their people on the horizon to learn about humanity during the journey home. They promised to stay in their assigned quarters and follow all human rules. Richard looked at his crew and saw hope in their faces. He said yes. The next morning, the human delegation returned to the horizon with 50 Kavan guests. Lisa watched the aliens board and felt uneasy, but she could not explain why. They seemed friendly and curious. They smiled at the crew and asked questions about Earth. Everything seemed perfect. 3 days into the return journey, Peter Grant was working the night shift in engineering. He found one of the Kavan in a restricted area with their hands touching the main computer. The alien said they were just curious about how humans organized information. Peter reported it to Jake, who told Lisa. Lisa started watching the security footage more carefully. The Kavan moved through the ship in patterns. They always traveled in groups, and they always seemed to know exactly where they were going. She found clips of them entering restricted areas when the crew was sleeping. When she showed Richard, he said she was being paranoid. The Kavan were their friends. Vincent made a discovery in his laboratory that changed everything. While studying a plant sample from Eden, he found something hidden in its genetic code. There were instructions buried in the DNA. When he ran them through the computer, they decoded into plans for a parasite, a microscopic organism designed to invade and control brain tissue. Before Vincent could tell anyone, he became sick. Karen examined him in medical and found an unknown organism in his blood. Under the microscope, she saw the same parasite from the encoded instructions. Vincent had been infected somehow. She tried every medicine she had, but the parasite adapted to everything. It was learning. Helen received a message that night from somewhere in deep space. It was in the Kavan language, but it was not from Eden. She worked through the night to translate it. The message was from a species called the Remnants. They were warning humanity. The Kavan were not friends. They were predators. The Remnants' message was clear and terrifying. Helen read it 3 times to make sure she understood correctly. The Kavan identified promising species across the galaxy and gained their trust. They offered gifts and friendship and technology. Then they harvested them. The biological samples were infection vectors. The technology contained hidden controls. The ambassadors were not diplomats but infiltrators. The Remnants had been a civilization of 12 billion people spread across 4 planets. After they accepted the Kavan friendship, only 3,000 survived. They lived now on ships in the dark between stars, hiding from the shepherds who had destroyed their worlds. The message ended with a plea. Do not trust them. Do not let them into your systems. Destroy them before they destroy you. Helen took the message to Lisa immediately. They went together to Richard's ready room and showed him the translation. His face went pale as he read. He had known something was wrong, but he had wanted First Contact to succeed so badly that he had ignored his instincts. He ordered Yellow Alert and demanded a meeting with the Kavan representatives. Elder Zechary came to the bridge with 4 other Kavan. Their skin was pulsing with calm blue colors, but Richard could see something else underneath. Something calculating and cold. He confronted them with the Remnants' message and asked if it was true. Zechary did not deny anything. He explained in perfect English that the Remnants were bitter survivors who did not understand the gift they had been offered. The Kavan did not harvest species. They transcended them. They offered other civilizations the chance to join a collective consciousness and achieve true peace. Every individual became part of something greater. All conflict ended. All suffering stopped. Richard felt sick. He asked what happened to species who refused this gift. Zechary smiled and said that no species refused once they understood. The transformation was inevitable. Some fought at first, but eventually everyone saw the beauty of unity. Humanity would be the same. They would join the 73 other species already part of the Kavan consciousness. Richard ordered security to confine the Kavan to quarters immediately. Zechary did not resist, but his final words made everyone on the bridge freeze. It was already too late. The gifts had been distributed throughout the ship. The organisms were already spreading. Within days, the crew would begin to change, and they would understand that resistance was pointless. Karen confirmed the worst an hour later. 15 crew members were infected, including Vincent. The parasite had reached his brain, and he no longer responded to questions. He just stared ahead with empty eyes. When she scanned the infected crew, she found their brain patterns were synchronizing with each other. They were becoming one mind. Jake discovered that the power system the Kavan had given them contained hidden code. When activated, it would give the aliens complete control of the horizon. He started a purge of all ship systems, but the code regenerated faster than he could delete it. The Kayvon technology was alive and it was fighting back. Lisa organized the uninfected crew into defensive teams. She established quarantine zones and began monitoring everyone for signs of infection. She sent Greg with a team to secure the biological samples. But when they reached the storage bay, the containers were open. The samples had been released into the ventilation system on purpose. The Kayvon broke out of their quarters 12 hours after being confined. They moved through the ship with frightening coordination. Their translucent skin now pulsed with aggressive red patterns. They were stronger than humans and faster. When they caught crew members, they did not kill them. Instead, they injected them with concentrated doses of the parasite to speed up the infection. Richard made the hardest decision of his life. He ordered the ship's computer to seal off the infected sections, even though 50 crew members were trapped inside with the Kayvon. Helen argued there had to be another way, but Lisa supported the order. They could not let the infection spread to the entire ship. Karen found the parasite's weakness while studying tissue samples from Vincent. The organism could not survive extreme cold. Below -50 degrees Celsius, it became brittle and died. She proposed venting atmosphere from the infected sections to expose them to space. The cold would kill the parasites without immediately killing the crew if they had oxygen and thermal protection. The plan was dangerous, and many would die, but Richard approved it. Jake began programming the venting sequence. Then Zekhri's voice came over the ship intercom, speaking perfect English without any translation device. He no longer pretended to be friendly. Zekhri explained that humanity's resistance was admirable but futile. The Kayvon had assimilated 73 species over 10,000 years. Each one resisted at first. Each one clung to their individuality and their freedom. But eventually every species understood the beauty of unity. Humanity would be no different. They would become part of the collective, and their aggressive, adaptable nature would make the Kayvon stronger. The atmospheric venting began. Crew members in the infected sections had emergency oxygen and thermal suits, but the cold was brutal. Several infected crew members who were deep into transformation did not survive. The Kayvon proved more resilient than expected. Their bodies adapted to the cold better than human bodies could. Many were injured, but many survived. Peter was in engineering when he discovered something terrible. The power generation system the Kayvon had given them was not just technology. It was alive. A biological machine that had been growing throughout the ship's power grid. It had been feeding on energy and was almost mature enough to take control of all primary systems. He reported to Jake immediately. Jake realized they had to shut down the main reactor and switch to backup power. It would cripple the ship's ability to maneuver, but it was the only way to stop the biological machine from taking over. He began the shutdown sequence while the creature fought back. It sent electrical discharges through the engineering bay and vented superheated plasma. Lisa led a team through the infected sections to rescue survivors. They found crew members hiding in storage rooms and maintenance tunnels. The Kayvon were hunting them systematically. Lisa's team fought running battles through the corridors. Greg killed 3 Kayvon with his plasma rifle before one of them grabbed him. He activated a grenade and took the alien with him. They found Vincent locked in a supply closet. Somehow he had fought off the parasite's control through sheer willpower, but his brain was badly damaged. He could barely speak, but he recognized Helen. She helped him to his feet and they moved toward the escape pods. The horizon was falling apart. Fires burned in 6 sections. Life support was failing. Half the crew was dead or infected. The Kayvon controlled 30% of the ship. Richard gathered the surviving officers. There were 87 uninfected crew members left. They were surrounded and outnumbered, but they were not defeated yet. Richard looked at the faces around the conference table. Helen was exhausted from translating Kayvon communications. Lisa had blood on her uniform from the fighting. Jake's hands were burned from working with damaged systems. Karen looked like she had not slept in days. Vincent sat in a corner staring at nothing. These were his people, and he had led them into this nightmare. Helen suggested they use the communication array to send a warning to Earth. The Kayvon would try to stop them, but if they could transmit everything they had learned, humanity might have time to prepare. Lisa argued they should destroy the horizon completely to ensure the Kayvon never reached Earth. Jake believed they could retake engineering and overload the reactor in a controlled way that would give survivors time to evacuate and escape. Richard made his decision. They would do all 3 at once. Helen would transmit the warning. Jake would prepare the reactor overload. Lisa would lead strike teams to rescue any crew members they could find. It was a suicide mission for most of them, but it was the only way to stop the Kayvon from reaching Earth. Helen gathered her team and headed for the communication array on Deck 7. The route took them through sections controlled by the Kayvon. They moved quietly through maintenance tunnels and avoided the main corridors. Twice they heard infected crew members walking past their hiding spots. The infected moved in perfect unison like soldiers marching. They reached the communication array with only 2 casualties. Greg's replacement, a young officer named Carl Baker, had brought 8 security personnel to guard the position. Helen immediately began programming the transmission. She would broadcast on every frequency humanity used. She would send everything they knew about the Kayvon to Earth and any other species that might be listening. The Kayvon attacked before she finished. They came from 3 directions at once, moving with inhuman coordination. Carl and his team opened fire with plasma rifles. The Kayvon fell, but more kept coming. They felt no fear and no pain. When one was wounded, the others adapted their tactics instantly. Helen kept working while the battle raged around her. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. The transmission had to include the warning about the parasites and the biological technology and the false promises of peace. It had to tell Earth that the Kayvon were predators who harvested civilizations. She finished the final line and hit transmit. The message burst from the horizon's array at light speed. It would take years to reach Earth, but it would get there. Helen allowed herself one moment of relief before a Kayvon broke through the defensive line. Carl threw himself between Helen and the alien. He fired his rifle point blank into the creature's chest. It died, but not before its claws ripped Carl open. Jake and Peter reached main engineering through a service shaft. The biological machine had grown massive. Its tendrils wrapped around every system like the roots of a terrible tree. It pulsed with stolen energy, and Jake could feel it watching them. It was aware. It was intelligent, and it knew what they planned to do. Peter moved to the reactor controls while Jake provided cover. The biological machine attacked by sending electrical surges through the deck plating. Peter screamed as the current threw him against a bulkhead. Jake ran to him, but Peter was already dead. Jake finished what Peter had started. He input the overload sequence and set the timer for 30 minutes. It was enough time to evacuate, but not enough for the Kayvon to stop it. The biological machine went insane. It vented plasma coolant and caused power surges throughout engineering. Jake ran for the exit while fires erupted behind him. The machine's tendrils tried to grab him, but he made it to the door. He sealed engineering behind him and hoped the overload would hold. Lisa led 3 teams through the infected sections. They moved fast and hit hard. The Kayvon were prepared for a defensive fight, but not for humans attacking into their territory. Lisa's team used grenades and plasma rifles to clear corridors. They found survivors in sealed rooms and hidden compartments. One group of 15 crew members had barricaded themselves in the armory. They had weapons and ammunition, but no way out. Lisa's team blasted through the Kayvon surrounding them and led the survivors toward the escape pods. Another group was trapped in the medical bay. Karen had stayed with them, trying to treat the wounded. Lisa fought her way to them and got everyone moving. They found Vincent wandering a corridor alone. The parasite had damaged his mind, but somehow he still fought against it. He kept repeating coordinates to Helen. She realized he was trying to tell them where other survivors were hiding. They followed his directions and found 12 more crew members alive. The Kayvon realized what the humans were doing. They changed tactics and tried to cut off the route to the escape pods. Lisa's teams fought desperate battles at every intersection. They lost people, but they kept moving. The reactor timer counted down, and they had to reach the pods before it hit 0. Zachary appeared on the bridge where Richard stood alone. The alien had somehow bypassed every security measure. His skin pulsed with colors that hurt to look at. He told Richard that this was regrettable but necessary. The Kayvon could not allow humanity to warn other species or destroy knowledge that would benefit the collective. He offered Richard a final choice: surrender peacefully or die knowing he had accomplished nothing. Richard looked at the alien who had destroyed his ship and killed his crew. He thought about Helen transmitting her warning. He thought about Jake setting the overload. He thought about Lisa fighting to save every life she could. He smiled at Zachary and told him that humanity would never surrender its freedom. The Kayvon could have absorbed 73 species, but they would not take humanity without a fight. Richard activated the bridge self-destruct. It was a hidden protocol that only the captain knew about. The explosive charges were powerful enough to vaporize everything within 20 meters. Zachary realized what was happening 1 second before the bridge exploded. The blast killed them both instantly. Lisa felt the explosion through the deck plating. She knew what it meant. Richard had made his choice. She pushed her teams harder. They had to reach the escape pods now. The reactor would overload in 8 minutes. They made it to the pod bay with 4 minutes to spare. 112 survivors out of 300 crew members. Lisa did a quick count and her heart sank. So many dead, so many lost. But these people were alive and they would carry the warning home. Helen confirmed that her message had been received by Earth's deep space network. The transmission was spreading through human space. Humanity would know what was coming. They would have time to prepare. The survivors loaded into the escape pods. Each pod was programmed with a different route back to human space. If the cave-in tried to follow, they could not catch all of them. Lisa took command of the lead pod. Helen and Karen and Jake and Vincent were with her. They launched 30 seconds before the reactor overload reached critical. The horizon exploded in a flash of light that could be seen from the surface of Eden. The explosion vaporized everything within 1,000 kilometers. The cave-on were gone. The infection was contained. But the war had just begun. The escape pods drifted through space for 6 months before the rescue ships found them. Lisa watched the stars through the small viewport and thought about Richard and all the others who had died. 112 survivors out of 300. The price of first contact had been terrible. Earth had received Helen's warning and the entire planet had mobilized. When Lisa and her people finally reached home, they found a world transformed. The United Nations had formed a military command structure. Scientists were studying the data from the horizon. Engineers were building new ships designed specifically to fight biological threats. Vincent was taken to a medical facility where the best doctors in the world tried to repair his damaged brain. The parasite had nearly destroyed his neural pathways, but his incredible willpower had kept him partially functional. He could not speak clearly anymore, but he could write. And what he wrote was invaluable. He described how the parasite worked from the inside. He explained how it felt to fight the collective consciousness. His knowledge became the foundation for humanity's defense against cave-on infection. Helen worked with linguists from a dozen universities. The remnants had responded to her message and provided more information about the cave-on. Other species had also replied. Civilizations that had survived cave-on attacks or had fought them off. They were all willing to share what they knew. An alliance was forming. Free species from across the galaxy were uniting against the shepherds. Lisa was promoted to admiral and given command of military training operations. She built a new kind of soldier. People who could fight in zero gravity and in toxic atmospheres. People who understood that the enemy felt no pain and no fear. People who knew that captured comrades were already lost. It was brutal training, but necessary. The cave-on would come and humanity had to be ready. Jake led the engineering teams that designed the new warships. They learned from the Horizon's mistakes. No biological components would be allowed on any ship. All systems were mechanical or electronic with multiple redundancies. The hulls were designed to vent atmosphere quickly if needed. Every ship carried weapons that could flash freeze entire sections. The first new ship launched 8 months after the survivors returned. It was called the UNS Defiance, and Lisa stood on its bridge as it left Earth orbit. The ship was 3 times the size of the Horizon and carried twice the crew. But these were not explorers. They were soldiers, and they had a mission. Earth had detected cave-in activity near 3 human colonies. The aliens were not attacking yet, but they were watching, learning, preparing. Lisa took a fleet of 12 ships to defend those colonies. It was humanity's first military deployment into deep space. They reached the first colony on Kepler 442 after a month of travel. The colonists were terrified. They had seen strange ships in orbit. They had found organisms in their water supply that Karen's team confirmed were cave-on parasites. The infection had not spread yet, but it was only a matter of time. Lisa ordered an immediate quarantine. Every colonist was tested. 37 were infected in the early stages. Karen had developed a treatment based on Vincent's research. It involved controlled hypothermia to kill the parasites. It was painful and dangerous, but it worked. 29 colonists survived the treatment. 8 did not. The Kavon ships appeared 2 days later. There were 6 of them. They did not look like the beautiful organic shuttle that had docked with the Horizon. These were war vessels, dark and angular with weapons that glowed with unnatural light. They broadcast a message in perfect English: surrender and join the collective. Resist and be destroyed. Lisa's response was to launch every fighter the fleet had. The battle was brutal. Kavon weapons fired beams that dissolved hull armor. Human weapons fired projectiles that exploded with extreme cold. Ships died on both sides. The Kavon fought with perfect coordination, but humanity fought with rage and determination. Jake had built a new weapon into the Defiance. It was called the cryo-cannon, and it fired a stream of liquid nitrogen at relativistic speeds. When it hit a Kavon ship, the entire vessel froze solid. Then human railguns shattered it like glass. 3 Kavon ships were destroyed this way. The other 3 retreated. Lisa wanted to pursue, but she held her position. Her job was to defend the colony, not chase the enemy. But she knew this was just the beginning. The Kavon would come back with more ships. Humanity had won one battle, but the war was far from over. News of the victory spread across human space. People who had been terrified now felt hope. Humanity could fight the Kavon and win. More colonies requested protection. More ships were built. More soldiers trained. The United Nations formed the Stellar Defense Force with Lisa as its commander. Helen made a breakthrough in communication with the other free species. She established a real-time network that allowed instant coordination across light years. The technology came from a species called the Volari, who had been fighting the Kavon for centuries. With this network, the free species could warn each other of attacks and coordinate responses. The remnants sent representatives to Earth. They were small gray beings who wore environment suits because they could not breathe human air. They had lived in exile for so long that they had almost given up hope. Meeting humanity gave them something they had not felt in generations: a chance for revenge. The remnants told Lisa about the Kavon homeworld. Eden was not where the species originated. The Kavon had taken that planet from another species 3,000 years ago. Their true home was a system called Nexus Prime. That was where the collective consciousness was centered. That was where the absorbed species existed as part of the hive mind. That was what humanity needed to destroy. But Nexus Prime was defended by hundreds of Kavon ships. No single species could assault it successfully. It would take a combined fleet from all the free civilizations. It would take coordination on a scale never attempted before. And it would take time. Lisa spent a year building alliances and gathering intelligence. The Volari contributed ships with advanced weapons. The remnants provided navigation data for Kavon space. A species called the Kelmar offered soldiers who were immune to the parasites. A crystalline species called the Shin provided shields that could block Kavon beams. Vincent regained some of his ability to speak through intensive therapy. His first clear words were a message for Lisa. He told her that the absorbed species were not truly gone. Their consciousnesses still existed inside the collective. If the connection to Nexus Prime could be broken, those species might be freed. The war was not just about defeating the Kavon. It was about liberation. Humanity prepared for the largest military operation in its history. 100 ships would join 200 vessels from allied species. They would strike at Nexus Prime and break the collective. Every crew member knew the odds. Most would not survive. But they went anyway because some things were worth dying for. Freedom was one of those things. The combined fleet gathered at a neutral system 3 light years from Nexus Prime. Lisa stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched the Allied ships take formation. Human vessels flew alongside Volari cruisers and remnant fighters. The Kelmar brought massive carriers, and the Shin contributed ships that looked like floating crystals. 300 warships united by a single purpose. Helen had established communication protocols so all species could coordinate during battle. Vincent was aboard the Defiance as an advisor despite his injuries. Karen commanded the medical ships that would try to save whoever could be saved. Jake had personally overseen the weapon systems on every human vessel. They were as ready as they would ever be. The fleet jumped to Nexus Prime and found exactly what the remnants had warned them about. The Kavan had 400 ships defending their home world. The planet itself was covered in organic structures that pulsed with the combined consciousness of 73 absorbed species. Billions of minds trapped in a prison of flesh and forced unity. Lisa gave the order to attack. The battle began, with a massive exchange of fire that lit up space like a new sun. Kavan beams tore through Allied shields. Human cryo-weapons froze enemy vessels. Volari missiles exploded with electromagnetic pulses that disrupted Kavan coordination. The Kelmar soldiers boarded disabled enemy ships and fought hand to hand. The Kavan adapted quickly. Their ships moved in patterns that countered human tactics. They focused fire on the remnant vessels, first trying to break the fleet's coordination. But the free species had learned from every encounter. They did not fight as individuals. They fought as one while keeping their independence. It was unity through choice, not force. 3 Kavan ships broke through the Allied lines and headed for the Defiance. Lisa's tactical officer wanted to evade, but Lisa ordered them to hold position. The Defiance was the command ship and had to maintain communications. Jake activated the new weapons he had installed. Point defense lasers tracked the incoming vessels and fired continuously. 2 Kavan ships exploded. The third got close enough to fire its beam weapon. The beam hit the Defiance's starboard side and burned through 3 decks. 70 crew members died instantly. The ship shuddered but held together. Lisa ordered damage control teams to seal the breach. Then she ordered the cryo cannon to fire. The Kavan ship froze and shattered. Vincent was monitoring the collective consciousness from his station. He detected a pattern in how the Kavan ships communicated. They were all connected to the planet below. If that connection could be severed, the ships would lose coordination. He explained this to Lisa through his damaged speech. She understood immediately. Lisa ordered a strike team to break through the Kavan defenses and attack the planetary structures. 20 ships, including the Defiance, would make the run. The rest of the fleet would keep the main Kavan force occupied. It was a suicide mission, but volunteers filled every position. The strike team punched through the defensive line. They lost 6 ships in the first minute. The Kavan focused everything on stopping them, but the Allied vessels kept coming. The Defiance led the way with Lisa at the helm. They entered the atmosphere with enemy ships right behind them. The organic structures on the surface were massive, towers of flesh and bone that reached into the clouds. Vincent identified the central node. It was a pyramid 10 kilometers on each side that pulsed with energy. That was where the collective consciousness was centered. That was what they had to destroy. The Defiance and the surviving strike ships opened fire on the pyramid. Cryo-weapons and missiles and plasma beams all struck at once. The structure screamed. It was a sound that transmitted through space and into the minds of everyone in the system. The absorbed species were crying out. Lisa felt something touch her mind. Voices. Thousands of voices. Millions. They were the absorbed species, and they were begging for freedom. She felt their pain and their desperation. She understood what Vincent had been trying to tell her. These beings were not dead. They were prisoners. The pyramid began to collapse, but Kavan ships swarmed the strike team. The Defiance took hit after hit. Life support failed on multiple decks. The engines were damaged. But Lisa kept firing. The pyramid had to fall. Helen detected something from the Allied fleet above. The remnants were doing something with their ships. They were broadcasting on frequencies that disrupted the Kavan hive mind. It was a weapon they had been developing for centuries, a weapon they had saved for this moment. The Kavan ships began to lose coordination, their perfect unity fractured. Vincent shouted that the collective was breaking. The connection between the absorbed species and the Kavan central consciousness was weakening. If they could destroy the pyramid now, the absorbed species might be freed. Jake diverted all remaining power to the cryo cannon. The Defiance fired one last shot directly into the heart of the pyramid. The structure exploded. Energy rippled out, in waves that washed over the planet and reached into space. Every Kavan ship stopped moving at once. Every infected individual collapsed. The collective consciousness that had existed for 10,000 years shattered into fragments. Lisa felt the voices in her mind go silent. Then slowly they came back, but different. Individual, separate, free. The absorbed species were waking up. 73 civilizations were remembering who they had been before the cave-in took them. The battle ended. The cave-in ships drifted without purpose. The individual cave-in who had been part of the collective were confused and disoriented. Without their unity, they were just another species, vulnerable, defeated. Lisa ordered ceasefire. The killing could stop now. The free species had won not just a battle, but a war of liberation. The Allied fleet moved into orbit around Nexus Prime and began rescue operations. Billions of beings needed help. They had been prisoners for so long that many did not know how to be free. Vincent went down to the surface with medical teams. He walked through the ruins of the pyramid and found survivors from dozens of species. Some were ancient races that had been absorbed thousands of years ago. Some were recent victims. All of them were damaged, but alive. The work of rehabilitation would take years, but it could be done. Helen established contact with representatives from the freed species. They formed a council that would govern Nexus Prime until each civilization could be returned to their home worlds. The planet would become a symbol not of oppression, but of liberation, a reminder that freedom could be won even against impossible odds. Karen worked day and night treating the wounded from all species. She developed new therapies for beings who had been part of the collective. She saved thousands of lives. The medical knowledge shared between the free species advanced by centuries in a matter of months. Lisa stood on the bridge of the Defiance 1 month after the battle. The ship was being repaired in orbit around Nexus Prime. Around her, the Allied fleet was helping rebuild what the cave-in had destroyed. It was the beginning of something new. A true alliance of free civilizations united not by force but by choice. She thought about Richard and everyone who had died on the horizon. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. Humanity had gone to the stars seeking friends and found enemies. But in fighting those enemies, they had found real allies. They had learned that freedom was worth any price. The age of innocence was over, but the age of unity had begun. Not unity through submission, but unity through shared purpose. 73 species were free again. And humanity had proven that even when first contact goes wrong, it does not mean the story has to end in horror. Sometimes it ends in hope.